I grew up in the mountains west, and have had a lot of love for the outdoors as long as I can remember. Something about the practically limitless opportunities to explore and discover new things, to stumble upon something that few people have ever seen before, absolutely fascinated me in every way. You could never keep me inside as a kid. I would be out and about, trying to find new sights to see or trees to climb. The world was my jungle gym. I spent my youth in the Scouts and volunteering at summer camps. Let's just say I didn't shock anybody when I ended up becoming a park ranger after I graduated from college. My first job was in a park that was somewhat small and didn't have many staff on top of its piss-poor management already, and I found myself taking on all sorts of jobs throughout my time there. My tasks had their ups and downs, but none of them ever compared to the experience I had while patrolling a section of the reserve's forestry. Now, this is going to sound a bit dramatic, and perhaps it is, but that week was a turning point in how I approached my life in general. Up until then, I had an upbeat, optimistic guy, always trying to see the best in others. I had a very strong love for people, animals, and the planet we resided on. I mean, I still do to a degree, but I definitely approached my sentiment a far more naive manner in the past. While I was patrolling the forest that first day, the smell of smoke breezed past my nose. I turned my head into the direction it was in, continuously catching whiffs as I followed where it was coming from. There, I found a small fire pit made up of boulders, probably no more than 3 feet in diameter. The fire inside seemed as if it had been out for some time, so I knew the chances of me catching the person who built it were slim, which was a bit frustrating. Visitors were absolutely not allowed to start fires, except in designated areas during certain times of the year, and for very good reason. In the past, I had caught teenagers with all sorts of things, but few items ever presented a legitimate danger to the park. So, of course, the one time I stumbled upon something that I did, I had no indication of who was responsible. Not knowing what else to do, I dismantled the fire pit in hopes to discourage its creator from making one again, should they ever pass through the area once more. The rest of the day was pretty boring, if I was being honest. I always took the time to appreciate the nature around me, but that didn't mean it was particularly exciting. I returned to work the next day, already having forgotten about the fire pit situation from the previous night. I had already let the other staff and my superiors know about it, but like me, they mostly just shrugged their shoulders and said to let me know if I found anything else. And as it turned out later on in the day, I did. But it wasn't anything inherently dangerous. However, it did feel far more threatening than the fire pit. I wound up spotting a grimy old stuffed animal of a deer, a string wrapped around its neck as it was suspended from a tree branch. Something about that chilled me, far more than if the figure were something like a human doll. I guess if that were the case, it would feel too obvious, like somebody was trying too hard to spook people. Why would somebody choose a toy deer out of all things to suspend from a tree was beyond me at the time. I checked out the area a bit more and made out yet another fire pit. I wasn't too far away from the area where I had found the one from the previous day, so I was certain I would have stumbled upon it already. I began to wonder if the perpetrator returned after I left the site and reconstructed their fire pit. I took a deep breath and rolled my eyes, talking into my walkie-talkie about the second pit I found, and then went over to deconstruct it. Just to be sure I wasn't going insane, I left the site and didn't return until later in the evening. Nothing was there. Satisfied with my work, I went home for the day. I had the next day off, but requested my coworkers to keep me in the loop about whether or not they'd seen any new fire pits emerge. I didn't get any news. I was patrolling a different area of the park day after day, and of course, once more, stumbled upon a fire pit. However, this time, it didn't have any wood in it actually, just a circle of rocks. I still reported it nonetheless, and it wasn't long before I heard my boss over the walkie-talkie tell me to quit being so paranoid. I just sighed, simply kicking the structure apart. I despised this game of cat and mouse that I was playing. When I went on my lunch break, I decided to head back to one of the buildings and get some snacks out of the vending machines. I asked the other staff if the night patrol noticed anything strange, and that's when I learned that the night patrol didn't actually do anything, and mostly just dicked around and drank. When I asked if they were the ones responsible for building the fire pits, they told me no. I also brought up the hanged stuffed deer, which was met with a few laughs. Nobody really seemed to be bothered with what was going on, as I was. I was definitely the odd one out. Even though I wasn't getting paid to stay past my shift, I decided to stick around when night came anyway, and just go home late, or sleep in my car if need be. I was young, curious, and determined, and figured that catching the person who was building all those fire pits was worth my time. I didn't tell anybody I was staying, out of fear that they'd give me a hard time, or make me go home. I turned off my walkie-talkie and stuck around the area where I had found most of the recent fire pit. After a few moments, I began to hear the sound of people talking and pacing around. It wasn't long before a flashlight had come into view, and I could make out two men walking around in what appeared to be gray cloaks, holding bags that seemed to be stuffed to the brim. I was as perplexed as anybody would be. One of them grumbled about how that guy kept kicking down their fire pits, and I watched as they built it once more. I was so curious and fascinated that I had completely forgotten to even try and put a stop to their antics. I was armed, so I wasn't endangered in that sense, but I had no idea what these guys could be carrying. One of them opened this bag. There was just a bunch of sticks in there, and the other lit the fire. I watched them walk around as they seemed to light up more fire pits, until the entire area made out a ring of flame. There were a few calls, and a third cloaked man came out with a ladder. The second bag was opened, and from what I could indicate, there was just a bunch of stuffed animals inside. I watched as they stringed up the animals onto the trees before going to the center of the ring and lighting up what appeared to be a candle in the middle. One of them made a comment on how they needed to make it quick, to which the other argued that their process couldn't be rushed. I had no clue what was going on, and looking back, I still don't understand what their goal was. They all faced each other, and two more men came out of the woods and joined them. They sat cross-legged and let out low, melodic hums. By now, I knew it had to be some sort of cult ritual, and I was split on whether or not to intervene. I had no idea whether this was a nightly thing or something they only planned on doing once, and if that was the case, I knew I would rather leave them alone and let them finish up and leave, so they wouldn't be a problem anymore. Another part of me knew it was my responsibility to keep the park safe. Even if it was past my shift, I was still on the site. I admit, I don't know what inherent danger the men posed to the park, besides the fire, of course, which was still not allowed. It seemed to be well controlled, for the most part. These guys just creeped me the hell out. I could have approached them, but at the same time, like I said before, I had no idea what kinds of weaponry they could have concealed under their cloaks. I decided to head back a bit before turning my walkie-talkie back on and informing the rest of the staff about what I had just discovered. They were mostly confused, about both what I was describing and why I was still around past my shift. I explained that I stayed in order to see what was going on, and at this point, was getting pretty fed up with nobody else doing their job properly. So I cussed them out a bit. They told me they would come up to help, but after 20 minutes with no sign of anybody, I decided to go back and confront my coworkers face to face. They were, of course, drunk and didn't particularly believe me. I had to practically drag them out of my car and haul them to the place. However, by the time my headlights shone in the area, it was completely dark. We got out of the car. I took out my flashlight, and the stuffed animals were still hanging in the trees. The fire pits, while no longer burning, emitted smoke. The sight seemed to make my coworkers sober up, and we investigated the area a bit more. When we couldn't find the men, we sent out people to look for them. We came across several corpses of animals, such as deer, raccoons, and coyotes, all with rope tied around their neck. We cut it off before leaving the animals to rest and dismantled the site of the ritual. There wasn't much else we could do, and the search ultimately turned up nothing, and the fire pits stopped being built altogether. No more stuffed animals were discovered hanging from trees either. Like I said, this event shifted my entire mindset. While I still loved the outdoors, exploring it and discovering the things it offered, it was also a great venue to conceal darker parts of the world. I suppose I just tread the world more carefully now, and I've become a bit pessimistic in regards to my career. It has been a long time since I have worked at that park, and granted, I have stumbled across plenty of close calls in the wild since. Confrontations with grizzlies, for example. Still, none of them ever shook me like that event. And to this day, I still feel a bit creeped out when I came across a neat pile of rocks. Back when I was a sophomore in high school, my friends and I got heavily into just exploring and seeing what there is out in the world. We spent a lot of time in online forums, uploading photos and sharing experiences, but it wasn't too long before we found ourselves in a kind of friendly competition with a group from Ohio. The Michigan-Ohio rivalry is very real, and although we weren't exactly into college football, we still relished the chance to show up our counterparts in the next state over. It was a playful rivalry, however. I mean, who could ever take pride in the whole "my state is more messed up than your state" thing? So, one summer, my friends and I were on a long bike ride, scouting for potential sites in an old rundown industrial area near Kalamazoo. We take a break in this wooded area, and one of my friends goes off into the bushes to pee. About a minute later, we hear them shouting excitedly for us to come look at something. Once we make a few jokes about his junk being nothing to write home about, we follow and lay eyes on his sweet little discovery. It was this old, creepy cave. I mean, it seriously looked like it could have been the secret entrance to the Batcave or something. But a little preliminary exploration revealed that the place was actually an abandoned cement mine. Mines require a lot more specialist equipment. Any seasoned explorer will tell you that it's crucial to bring respirators to anywhere where air quality might be compromised. Mines are filled with all kinds of stuff that you really don't want in your lungs. So, about 2 weeks later, after a fair amount of planning and preparation, all 4 of us returned to the abandoned cement mine with the appropriate safety gear and a camera, ready to properly explore. We discovered that there was basically one main shaft that sloped deep down into the earth, so we followed that main route. It was wide enough to drive a pack up a pickup truck and was still in pretty decent condition, so traversing the mine shaft was much easier than we'd first thought. There were many rooms, old machinery, and resting equipment off of this main shaft. but we mostly avoided it in the beginning. We were just trying not to get lost or turned around in the darkness. As we shined our flashlights along the smooth rock walls, we saw that they were almost covered in spray paint graffiti. Mostly just the classic abandoned building stuff. Jimmy was here, swastikas, initials, and dates, etc. But as we got deeper and deeper, the graffiti really thinned out. Whoever was hanging out here before us obviously didn't go too deep into the mine. Probably for a good reason. As we wandered deeper and deeper into the old abandoned mine shaft, all natural light had faded, and we were relying solely on our high-powered flashlights. The air was so stagnant and hazy, with particles that even the light from expensive flashlights would only go 20 feet or so before just getting totally obscured by dust. Oh, and that dust has us thanking the big guy upstairs that we'd remembered to pack them. The glow sticks we had brought were also basically useless because they would disappear in the haze only a few steps after dropping them, and we had only brought a handful. Once we were about 30 feet below the earth, we started arguing amongst ourselves. Our little crew was nervous about going any deeper, with the air quality just being so terrible, and without a good way to prevent us from getting lost. We somehow managed to override our anxieties by reassuring ourselves that the path was easy and straightforward. So, we'd have a hard time getting lost. We were going to rely on our level-headedness, sense of direction, and flashlight battery life to get us out. Despite the agreement to push on, it was becoming very creepy for everyone. We walked in total silence for a long time, hearing nothing but our own footsteps and the steady drip of water coming from somewhere deep in the cave. I think we were all pretty scared at this point, but nobody was willing to admit it to each other. Call it bravado or whatever, but we just kept pushing on, pushing further and further into the mine. We stumbled across something that had us stopped in our tracks. Dug into the sides of the deep stone shaft we were slowly descending was a diverging tunnel. Little more than a passageway cut into the rock. It was narrow. You'd have to crouch to go through it, and it was also a good few feet off the ground, so it required a scramble to reach it. But that wasn't what made us stop. It was the graffiti. We hadn't seen any for a while, and like I said, we assumed the graffiti artists had never gone this deep. But someone else clearly had, and the messages they left were disturbing to say the least. The tunnel was lined with words written in white, chalky substances. Words like rot, decay, plague, and carrion. They were just words, scrawled by some degenerate, but it scared the living hell out of us. Who else would come this far just to write such a terrible message in a mysterious tunnel that broke from the main path? However, no matter how scared we were, there was no turning back. We had to see where the tunnel led to. Despite our fear, we were overwhelmed by intense curiosity. So as foolish as it seems now, one by one, we crawled through the tunnel to the other side. What we found was a strange flooded chamber. Around the pool of water was a series of these large carved stones, each covered with dozens of burned out candles. There must have been hundreds of pieces of melted wax dripping down each of the stone pieces. The walls had a few twisted, malformed faces scrawled on them, and the tunnel entrance back to the main shaft was ringed with a spray-painted blood-stained mouth. What was this place? Some bizarre cloister where black masses were performed possibly? An elaborate hoax set up by a bunch of kids? We couldn't find much evidence to figure it all out, and we were absolutely exhausted by this point, both from the exertion and the adrenaline crash. We all crawled out of that weird little chamber and back into the main shaft, where we were promptly headed towards the exit. When we finally saw natural light coming from the main entrance, we were relieved beyond words. We never did figure out what that mysterious cavern was for, and I think I'm content to leave it at a mystery. No, We didn't hear any eldritch creatures howling in the depths of the tunnel, nor did we find any entrance devil worshippers. But just finding that room, buried deep in an old forgotten mine, was more than enough to creep all of us out for a very long time. Look, I'm going to keep this email relatively short, simple, and sweet. To the point, you understand me? So I've done a fair share of spelunking in my day, deep diving in caverns and exploring the uncharted world under the earth we know and inhabit. Well, I don't do that anymore, and that's because I believe I encountered a demon underneath the earth. I'll spare the name of the cavern system because I can't have anybody hearing this, potentially, and going to check it out themselves and getting lost, or worse, finding what I did. In the southwestern region of the United States features a massive underground cavern system that spans all over and goes well into the Mexican desert. Well, I had spent some months going down here, traversing through as many tunnels as I could, when I encountered the den of what I believed to be a flying demon. Whatever this thing was nearly grabbed me and pulled me deeper into the earth. It looked like a gargoyle, whatever you want to call it. This thing had scales and it had wings. It looked like it was straight out of hell. No joke. It left me traumatized, scarred, and terrified me. It made me want to give it my love of spelunking for good. But I guess I'm not the only one who's had encounters with these same kind of demons. The Sonoran Desert, specifically, is filled with these uncharted cave systems underground, and I guess also filled with these demonic beings and encounters and sightings of these creatures by many other fellow spelunkers. Look, I'm not here to waste your time by feeding you some BS made-up story. After my account, I spent several hours talking and reaching out to fellow spelunkers and even natives of the area, and all of them, or nearly all of them, have their own account to tell, whether it be underneath the earth, exploring the cavernous underground terrain system, or seeing these things ascend into the night, stalking and looking for prey. I know it sounds far-fetched, but you know what? Sometimes there are just things in life that we have to accept as truth. And unfortunately, this is just one of them, even if it means forever giving up my love of spelunking. I wrote this on your page, but I wasn't sure if you would see it or not. So, sending it to you here. Hopefully, I have addressed this properly. People need to be aware that these things are real, and they are in the woods, and they are not natural. I don't know if they are government experiments, aliens. Some say demons, but I don't know. But this thing looked like an insect. I'm going to add a little here that I didn't add on your page, but I think it might be important. However, this may even make people even less inclined to believe me, so edit this as you see fit. Please include this letter with the story, but not my name or gender at the end. Thank you. I'm going to have to agree at this point about unknown entities in the woods. I saw something in the woods that I cannot explain. It looked and moved like a 6-foot praying mantis, and made this clicking screech as it followed me through the woods. No one believes me. My dogs were barking, snarling, whining, obviously terrified. I'm going to sell my property. I'm not going back into the woods. It was daytime. If it had been at night and my dogs hadn't been with me, I would probably be dead. I don't care who believes me or not. I'm 50, have cancer, and other people's opinions don't matter much to me anymore. Call it a demon if you wish. Call it an alien, a giant bug. All I know is that it was big, fast, loud, and it was not afraid of me. It was definitely stalking me. My chest hurts just writing this down. I didn't see it or hear it after I got in my truck. I just sat there paralyzed. I couldn't move. I see it almost every night in my dreams. I always go back looking for it, like it's calling me to it, beckoning me closer. Sometimes I stumble on it, and it's consuming a fresh killed deer or a hunter. Sometimes it is waiting for me and lashes out with its stiletto-laden arms, piercing my body before I even have a chance to defend myself, before I even have a chance to scream. And each time I see it, how do I know what it is? It looks exactly like a praying mantis. There's just something different about its eyes, like they see into my soul, like no insect ever could. It knows you fear it. I think it knows how to follow me into my dreams. I'm wondering now if it can track me here, to my home in the city, through my dreams. I barely sleep anymore at night, and every time the dogs bark at night, I jump, adrenaline racing through my heart. I need to add this, even though it may cause some doubt to my story even more. I have owned this property in the Ozarks since the early 1990s. From time to time, I have allowed close friends and family members to hunt whitetail on the land. They have all been taken into confidence that a small family of Sasquatch lives on the 20 acres, and gifts must be left each time the land is hunted. Something simple like a fruit basket and chocolate. They love apples, and chocolate is the best. They always take the entire basket. Sometimes they will leave a bundle of sticks or nuts where the basket was. They never bother us, and we never bother them. That stopped in August or September of 2018. The basket was left untouched. I rarely ever heard them call out. Maybe 3 to 4 times in all those years, but after 2018, the woods became more and more silent. The deer hunts were rarely successful, and the elk that were ever seen in the areas were never seen on my land. Something was wrong. No wild boar tearing up the property either. Now, I can understand why. I'm sure you've gotten your fair share of crazy stories. In fact, I'm sure you probably get a lot of stories that kind of come off as crazy. And I hope that mine can be taken seriously, because I can't refute what has been happening to me. My name is Daniel, and I love exploring the woods and venturing around, especially here in the swamps of northern Florida. And I know this might seem crazy, but I feel like lately, when I've been going out, I feel like I've been stalked by something, if that even makes any sense. I don't have a thorough background in hunting or doing anything extravagant in the outdoors, but I just love being outside in nature, at least up until recently, until I saw whatever it is I would call what I saw. I know a lot of people would even call Bigfoot far-fetched, but what I saw just isn't even in the realm of reality close to that. What I saw was some sort of giant looking like insect thing. Maybe it was an alien. I don't know. The swamps are already a pretty desolate and creepy place. It's the bogs where you'd expect to find monsters and any other sort of dangerous animals. But I never would have expected to see what I saw that one night. I've been venturing off in the swamps for years now, ever since I really learned that I really enjoy it. There's just something about the hot mugginess of it all that I guess I just kind of am addicted to. And being up here in northern Florida, you encounter all sorts of stuff, like huge insects, snakes, and even alligators. But it's pretty easy to keep your distance from those things, even more considering you can generally see those things off in the distance. And rarely do I ever feel like I've gotten ambushed or gotten too close to where I would be potentially ambushed. But ever since quarantine has happened, I've been letting myself kind of get lost in the swamps, to not just escape, but escape reality, escape the world that we live in, to find myself in a place of so much beauty. And like I said before, I've never seen or ran into a Bigfoot ever, and I don't know if I believe in them. But what I ran into is something far more scarier, in my opinion. It all started when I began hearing this weird clicking noise. Sometimes it would appear as if it was directly behind me. Then other times, it would sound like it was all around me, top to bottom, 360 degrees, like some sort of swarm of insects that I couldn't swat away. It was very bizarre. The noise would just kind of come and go, and sometimes would change in volume, and even pitch. Over time, it began to make me more and more uncomfortable. I soon realized I wasn't just hallucinating, or having some sort of vision. I was experiencing a noise that was surrounding me, that I couldn't identify. I couldn't pinpoint it to any specific animal. Until just a ways from me, directly in front of me, I saw these yellow eyes, is what I would call them. They were large. They didn't look like they were coming from an animal. The eyes were very close together, large, bulbous looking, and they kind of emanated a bright yellow glow. And that's when I was able to see the silhouette of what they were attached to. The head looked very much like a large insect head. Look, I know this sounds crazy, and I don't know if you'll believe me or not, but I'm telling you, this is what I saw. This head was maybe 30 to 40 feet away from me, and it looked larger than I was. My first instinct was I was either hallucinating or this was somebody in an elaborate insect costume or something. But as I looked at it, and as it looked into me, the clicking sound grew louder and louder, and I felt imminent danger. Like if I stayed there any longer, I was going to die. Whatever this was, it was standing in the bog and the brush, and I couldn't see its body, but I could definitely see its head, and make out that it was something I'd never seen before, something I never even heard anybody talk about. Was this a Bigfoot? I don't think so. Last I checked, Bigfoots don't resemble an insect in any way, or at least so I think. After feeling like if I stuck around any longer, I would perish, I fled in fear, and I eventually made it back home. But the problem was I couldn't tell anybody what had happened. Even to those I knew who had had experiences out in the swamps and the woods with their own personal Bigfoot encounters, they would never believe anything like I just explained to you. This was something far different, and I don't even know what kind of animal you would classify it as. Whatever it is had large glowing yellow eyes and looked very insect-like, and was larger than me. Pretty sure that most would classify that as an alien or something. I don't know. This is all new to me because I never even believed in that stuff to begin with. And then I encountered this. For the record, this just happened a few weeks ago. I figured the best way to process what I had seen and what I encountered would be to sit down and write it out. Although, I'll admit, I struggled for a long time on who do I even give it to? Who's gonna read this and think I'm not crazy? So I'm kinda just doing this out of desperation, and I'm sending it to you and a few others in hopes that you won't call me crazy, and that maybe you can give me some information on what it is that I encountered exactly, or what I saw. Let me just say that I've been out in the swamps many times before, and I have never had this sort of experience, if you want to call it that. Look, I get that there are animals that we haven't yet discovered, and that whole unknown species thing going on that a lot of biologists like to throw around, but this just felt too ominous. I don't feel like this was an undiscovered animal. I felt like, I don't know. I'm sorry I'm tripping over my words here, even writing this down. I'm shaking just reliving this event. Just thinking about it and bringing me back to those moments, it's still really hard for me to relive. Because, like I said earlier, it's so out of the realm of my reality, or most people's reality, I would say. Again, I have never heard of anything like this, nor have I ever heard anybody that I know of who's any sort of experienced outdoorsman or hunter talk anything about this. I don't expect you to have any answers, or to really give me any closure to what I saw, but any information you could possibly give me would be much appreciated. Hi, what lurks beneath. Right now, I'm reminiscing back on when I used to be able to go on hikes and do cross-country trips, but since quarantine, that's kind of been shut down, and I prefer to stay safe inside. Although I don't really prefer the inside, I love being outside, in the outdoors, in nature. I'm not a proficient or experienced outdoorsman by any stretch of the means, so I don't want you to get that idea before I share this with you. But I do enjoy my long hiking trips, and any chance I can get to go spend outside. Now, this particular event that I'm going to share with you happened years ago when I was hiking out in the Ozarks. I had spent miles and days doing a single solo hiking trip. I came to a small clearing at night, up in an area that was kind of hard to get to, where I was going to set up my tent and crash out for the night. This area that this large clearing was in wasn't easy to get to. after clearing some steep rocks and climbing through really thick brush for a couple hours just to get far, far away from any trail or human contact, because I do enjoy the isolation. I'm stating this because whoever was out here that did this, I'm not sure how they got out here or why they were here, but I guess that might be revealed to the reader as I describe the event. The clearing that I was in was surrounded by trees, although there was a small hill that you had to cross. So, I didn't notice this at first. I started setting up my tent, and then I had to go gather firewood. So I walked over this small hill, and that's right when I saw this. It was about 20 to 30 feet in diameter, if I had to guess. It was a large pentagram, burnt into the ground. Not only was the grass around it dead, but the trees around this pentagram were also dead and appeared to be burnt by some high-intensity flame. In the center of this pentagram lied a small pile of charred bodies. Not humans, but small animal bodies. I observed the sighting a little closer, and I couldn't tell because the bodies were so charred, but they appeared to be small dogs from what I could tell. Either way, I got a really bad feeling. It's like the entire atmosphere around me just changed, and I began to feel uncomfortable. That's when I started to feel that I was being watched, that maybe I wasn't alone, and there was someone else or something else around me. I still wonder how they were able to burn that into the ground, and why all the trees and everything else around was burnt. I don't know what you'd even use for that, or why it was done, all the way out here, far off any trail, in the middle of nowhere. But I guess I'm not meant to have those answers. Anyway, after seeing that pentagram, I ran down, packed up my tent, and quickly found another spot about an hour or two later on, when it was dark. Yeah, setting up my tent in the dark. That was fun, but I sure as hell wasn't going to sleep around that. So this occurred about 7 years ago, when I went fishing in the southern part of the Ozarks with a good buddy. We had started off in the morning, and our plan was to find a really good fishing spot along a creek. I didn't really know the Ozarks that well, but my buddy did, which is why I was letting him lead. Well, during our trekking and adventure, we began hearing a horrible noise off in the distance. Now, because of where we were in the forest, it was really hard to tell how far away sound was, because when you're in the woods, especially the deep, thick woods, sound can travel kind of funny, and sometimes you can have a really hard time distinguishing just how close noise is. But this sounded like it was loud enough, that it was far away, that I think we're safe, even though after we heard it, we got out of there. What we heard were two distinct, loud roars. Well, it wasn't just one. This was continuous. It sounded like two Tyrannosaurus Rexes fighting. If you've ever watched the movie Jurassic Park, you know how loud those things are? I mean, they come from massive animals. Although fictional in the movie, it had that same kind of volume, which meant that whatever animal was making it had to have been huge. Now, I'm not saying there was two T-Rexes out in the woods. What I'm saying is that we heard noises at that same volume capacity, incredibly loud that it shook the woods around us, and there was two of them, and it sounded ferocious, like there was some sort of fight going on. I don't know what the hell that was all about, nor do I know what animal it even belonged to. My buddy looked at me, and he was pale as a ghost. He didn't answer me when I asked him what animal that was. He didn't have an answer. And it wasn't until afterwards, when we got a chance to sit down and actually talk about it, that I asked him about it. He said he had never heard that in the woods before, and he's been out there multiple times. To our knowledge, any wildlife or natural-born animal that lives in that area of the United States doesn't have that sort of lung capacity to make that volume of a roar, let alone even sound exactly like that. The tone and pitch kind of reminded me if it came from a 50-foot alligator or something of that size. You know, When you watch enough movies, you can kind of get the chance to hear how loud some of these fictional creatures are. And although they are fake and from movies, I feel like they get the volume quite right when you have an animal of that capacity. Anyway, I'm just trying to get the point across that whatever was making these roaring noises had to have been incredibly massive, and it didn't sound like any animal I have ever heard in my life. Same with my friend. While I didn't encounter a Bigfoot or anything like that, I did have a disturbing account all of my own. This happened in Central Oregon. Now, I don't know if I had wandered into an area where somebody had opted out of this world, but my findings disturbed me, to say the least. I found a pair of bloody shoes on the ground in the middle of the forest during my hike. After quickly observing my surroundings, I found nothing. No signs of a body, no signs of a blood trail or where these would lead to. These looked like pretty clean, fresh new sneakers from what I could tell. They were covered in dried blood and just laying there, right on the ground, as if somebody had just taken them off, right there in the middle of the forest, and that was it. I don't know what that was about, but it still creeps me out to think about to this day. So I believe this happened back when I was hiking the Sierra Nevadas. This would have been about 2011, and I believe I stumbled upon a den of some animal. Probably a bear or a cougar, whatever lives up there. But that's not the scary part. I found multiple human skulls in this cavern. Probably about 8 or 9, if I'm counting right. Upon first entering the cavern, I thought it might have just been a shallow alcove, until I realized that it dipped down deeper. And so my curiosity got the best of me, and I had a flashlight on me. Although this cave wasn't deep, I was able to go in enough that I can kind of see that it opened up into a larger chamber. I didn't see any hiking equipment, or full bodies, or full skeletons of people. Just about 8 or 9 skulls of people. They looked to be pretty weathered and old, like they had been there for a while. I didn't see any other bones, at least any that I could identify. There were a lot of other miscellaneous bones, like animal skulls, and I think a few rib bones here and there, things like that. But no full human skeleton, like you would expect from a movie. Either way, I saw that, it freaked me out, and I noped right out of there. At the time, I wasn't carrying a GPS with me, or even a map, so I couldn't tell you where exactly along the mountain range that this small little cavern was. But either way, it really scared me, and I guess I should have contacted the authorities about it, but I never really did. So I don't know if those are skulls of people who had gone missing and wound up in there, in that den, of whatever lived in there. Do bears even make dens in caverns like that and eat on animals and people? I don't know. I don't know the kind of den that cougars live in either. So again, this is all just speculation. But what's not speculation is the fact that I found about 8 or 9 human skulls. That did happen. In order to keep my identity and location as private as possible, I'll be revealing minimal details about where I live. But I will say that I live in the southeastern section of the United States. Not Florida, though. The area in which I live in is a very large valley filled with lots of thick woods. But here's the disturbing part of the whole thing. At nighttime, you can hear chilling screams from the woods that even scares most experienced woodsmen and hunters. In fact, much of my friends are hunters, very experienced at that, and there's just certain parts of the valley that they stay out of because they claim they have seen things, like large moving shadows, sounds they can identify, and the feeling of being watched that they just can't shake. Now, if that doesn't spook you, I don't know what will. I'm unsure of what kind of monsters live out in the woods, especially out here, but clearly they must be dangerous enough and in great numbers to scare most of my friends, who, again, are very experienced in the outdoors and have spent many years of their lives hunting all sorts of game. One of my closest friends, for the sake of the story, I'll call him Bill. He's an older man, but he has spent much of his life hunting, and so he knows the woods very well. He was telling me about how when he found a full-grown buck lying dead with its head twisted and ripped off its body. The head was just left there, lying next to the body. He said when he found it, it was somewhat of a fresh kill, and whatever or whoever killed this just did it and left it. This was a good-sized buck too, a 5-pointer at that, so there's no reason that somebody would have just come and done this. And when he looked at the skin, he kind of felt a chill go down his spine. Something grabbed this buck and literally ripped its head right off. Twisted it, to be exact. Like when you twist something round and round until the skin finally rips. I don't know what's out there in the woods that can grab a full-grown buck, a 5-pointer, grab it by the head and twist its head till it rips off, and then leave it there. What's the purpose? Why? I don't care to know. All I know is that it terrified me when he told me this. And Bill doesn't scare easily, but he was shaking as he told me this story and retold it to me with perfect punctuation and detail, so I apologize if I don't get every detail to you. Anyway, I know this email isn't very long, but I just wanted to share with you that there are some dangerous things out there in the woods, even around my neck of the woods.